Hello, this is Dr. Gwen Fisher in Industrial Psychology, Psychology 440. We are in Module 15, now talking about the future of IO psychology. This is Module 15.4. There are a couple things that we're going to cover in this module. First, we're going to talk about current issues and some hot topics in IO psychology. In other words, what's really big in the field right now. And secondly, we're going to talk about the future of industrial organizational psychology. Where are we going as a field? So at this point, we're going to really take it out and look at the big picture rather than focusing on a lot of the specific things that we've been doing all together this semester. The objectives of this module are as follows. First, you should be able to identify and understand current issues in IO psychology. And secondly, acquire an understanding of, in general, where we are headed and where we need to go in the future. In order to do this, we're going to take a step back. We're going to go back in time to the in this course. What is industrial organizational psychology? At this point, you should definitely know that IO psychology is the scientific study of the workplace. That is the definition provided by the Society for Industrial Organizational Psychology. What we study in IO psychology is the study of mind and behavior related to work. Specifically, what is the I in industrial psychology? What you can't see is me kind of drawing the letter I with my arm as I'm looking at this. I, or industrial psychology, refers to the assessment, measurement, and selection of people into jobs, methods for training them, and methods for assessing performance and providing feedback. It's applying psychology to human resource management, and there are other terms that we use for this presently, things like talent management. So one question I have for you as we think about where the field is currently and where we're headed, does work itself remain the same? In other words, are there ways in which the world of work is changing? I'm going to pause for just a moment, and I'd like you to think about your own answer to that question and perhaps jot it down in your notes. Okay, do you have some ideas of how work might remain the same? Well, here are some of my thoughts. IO psychology has been and will be the study of people at work. In other words, the notion that organizations are comprised of people isn't something that's necessarily going to change. We might change where we work, when we work, and how we work, but it's still organizations comprised of people. And people are assigned to do various tasks. Another thing that won't really change necessarily with organizations is the need to attract, select, retain, train, evaluate, and provide feedback to employees. In other words, all of the basic processes that we studied during this course are still likely to hold true and be relevant. These issues have not changed. These big picture things like how to attract people, how to select the right people for jobs are issues that we've been studying now for decades. What we've changed is what we know about each of those. The same, I'd like you to think about how has work changed? Among the reading for part of the module here is to return to Chapter 1 in your textbook, in which the authors of the book indicated ways in which the world of work has been changing. So how has work changed? There are a number of different things that have been going on. Importantly, there is increased technology. We use technology in so much of what we do, and it can be both a help and a hindrance. Do you carry a cell phone with you, maybe a smartphone? Do you check your email on a regular basis when you're out and about? Do you think it's convenient that you're able to have access to things like email and text messages wherever you are? I take my laptop just about anywhere, and it's great that no matter where I am or what I'm doing, as long as I have my laptop, I can do some work. The downside to that, though, is that we don't escape from work, and it's harder to set clear boundaries between work and non-work when we have technology with us all the time. As I'm sure you're well aware, we now have a global economy where many US companies have offices, manufacturing facilities, and do other work in other countries. And other countries also have places here in the United States. My family and I joke a little bit that the Honda Accord that we have was actually built more in Ohio than the Ford that we have that was built over in Japan. It's just interesting the way the world works that way. Diversity is another topic, and with increased globalization and cross-cultural issues comes the importance of recognizing individual differences in diversity. Work is also evolving in terms of changing demographics. One example is having dual career couples. How many of you are partnered or expect that at some point you will be partnered and that you and your partner will both work? That's exactly the issue that faces dual career couples. Another change is the notion of older workers. We've seen an increasing proportion of older workers in the workforce, and currently we have up to 3 generations working side by side. This leads to increased age heterogeneity in the workplace, different values, different ways of approaching things, and just recognizing different needs among those different age groups. Work has also evolved to have an increased reliance on a service economy. In other words, in the United States, we've moved vastly away from being predominantly a manufacturing country to where we rely on a lot of services, a lot of consulting, a lot of businesses, the fact that restaurants or places are open 24 hours a day. Have you ever been to a McDonald's drive-thru at midnight, or perhaps gone to Walmart in the middle of the night because you need some groceries? Maybe you haven't, but I certainly have. Another one is access to what we call big data. This is the gobs and gobs of data, to put it technically, where organizations have lots of information about what interests us. It's the reason why I get things like TCBY coupons in the mail, or Kohl's coupons, or things from retailers that know that those are the kinds of things that I like to have and I like to do. So what are some current hot topics in industrial organizational psychology? There are a number of them. One is understanding the role of technology at work. As I indicated before, is technology a facilitator? Does it help us get work done, or does it get in the way? It can actually be both of those things, but that's a hot topic right now. Another one in the area of personnel selection is the use of technology. In other words, now we can have people do things like cognitive ability tests online rather than having to go to a particular company to do those tests. A student in my face-to-face psychology 440 course recently told me about how she was asked to record herself answering questions for an employment interview and then to send that recording to the employer. So we use tools like Skype or Google Hangouts or other technology as interview media and ways for the selection process to take place. Another one is focusing on those individual differences and bringing diversity to organizations. One of the assigned readings is a brief Harvard Business Review article that indicates specifically that diversity on its own is not enough. And lastly, cross-cultural issues, recognizing ways in which people are different and our need for validating assessment tools across cultures, understanding how people act, behave, and view things from different cultures. Other current issues and hot topics include the self-regulation in ways that our work behavior might be regulated. Self-regulation has also been examined in relation to sleep and emotions. One of the topics nearest and dearest to my heart is occupational health psychology. Occupational health psychology has been around for about 20 to 25 years, so it's relatively young compared to a lot of industrial psychology. Occupational health psychology focuses on worker health and well-being, and in essence has expanded the content domain or the criterion domain for what we focus on in organizations to look beyond traditional topics like job performance to include things like worker health and well-being. job satisfaction, meaningfulness of work, and other aspects of the positive side of organizations is certainly included in here. The National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health has an organization now focusing on total worker health and what are the ways in which organizations more generally can improve worker health and well-being. A lot of research in occupational health psychology and in other areas of IO psychology are focused on developing and evaluating interventions. In other words, what are some specific ways we can modify the work environment? What can we change? And do these things work for improving any of a number of things? Are these interventions effective perhaps as a training intervention for improving performance? Are these interventions successful in retaining people in the workforce? Or are we able to improve worker health and well-being? Interventions are important for helping us understand what works and what doesn't. Here is just a brief summary of some recent research hot off the press as of 2014. There was a meta-analysis of cognitive ability and non-task performance. Earlier in this course, you learned quite a bit about cognitive ability in relation to job performance. But what we now know is that general mental ability is unrelated to counterproductive work behavior, but it's modestly related to organizational citizenship behaviors. You can see here the correlation of 0.23 between the general mental ability and organizational citizenship behaviors. Organizational citizenship behaviors are things that are not necessarily that are definitely not task performance, but people who go above and beyond. One example where I used to work is that there was a guy named Dave who took it upon himself to refill the printer paper at the end of his workday. And at one point, Dave retired, and I was blown away at how many times I went to print something and the printer ran out of paper. And we miss Dave for lots of reasons, but boy, did we miss the fact that he always took it upon himself to make sure that we were well stocked with paper. Perhaps in your experience, you can think of things that people have done or maybe that you've done that constitute organizational behaviors. Another study examined a meta-analysis of personality and safety behavior. In other words, how are personality characteristics related to safety behavior at work? Characteristics like agreeableness and conscientiousness are negatively related to unsafe behaviors. In other words, people who are agreeable and conscientious are more likely to engage in more safe behaviors. On the other hand, extroversion and neuroticism are positively associated with unsafe behaviors. We can think of lots of reasons why this might in fact be the case, but of course it's correlational research, so we want to be careful about inferring true cause and effect relationships. Agreeableness in their study accounted for the largest proportion of variance in safety-related behavior. Openness to experience was unrelated to whether people engaged in safety behavior. And characteristics like sensation-seeking, altruism, anger, and impulsiveness were all related to safety behavior. Again, perhaps not surprising if you think about what those constructs actually are. One of my favorite recent articles was about telepressure. Have you ever received emails and felt that you really needed to respond right away? Well, Barber and Santuzzi, in a study in the Journal of Occupational Health Psychology, coined this term telepressure. It's that fixation, or they defined it as a fixation with checking and quickly responding to messages. Telepressure is associated with a number of individual outcomes on the negative side, things like burnout, feeling emotionally exhausted from your work, maybe impaired performance due to poor health, as well as missing work due to sickness absence. Have you ever taken a mental health day? That's certainly an example of leaving work or not being at work, and it could be classified as sickness absence as well. A number of workplace norms contribute to the problem of telepressure. What we know from the literature is that it's important to set clear boundaries and encourage non-work time on the behalf of work. So what are some topics? Where do we research? One is in the areas of competencies. When we studied job analysis in Module 3, we talked about competencies and competency modeling. Organizations have done and are doing this quite a bit. However, there isn't a single definition of what constitutes competencies, nor do we know the best way and the most effective way of doing competency modeling. Another area where we need more research is on corporate social responsibility. In other words, understanding more about protecting the environment and philanthropic missions on behalf of organizations. There's some research evidence that points to corporate social responsibility as important factors in attracting workers for jobs, but there's more that we hear. We talked in the performance management modules about some of the current challenges in the field, where there's even a debate about should we just do away with performance management altogether? And while some have argued that, and I tend to agree with this, that we can't just completely get rid of performance management because we still need some criteria by which we need to assess who should get promoted, how much of a raise should people get, and these should perhaps be merit-based personnel decisions. So if we can't do away with performance management altogether, perhaps there are ways that we can do it more effectively. Given things like big data, there are certainly issues and concerns about employee privacy and what should the boundaries be in terms of how far organizations should go. There are some questions and some research about the extent to which organizations should be privy to what people do in their non-work time, especially if it impacts their behavior at work. And lastly on this list is the notion of the dark side of work and organizations. My colleague, Dr. Chris Henley, in the management department here at CSU, has done a bit of research in this area, studying topics like counterproductive work behavior and understanding what happens when good people do bad things. So that concludes this particular module, 15.4, and the next topic that we're going to be covering is really what's happening at the end of the course. We're going to wrap up everything and tie a pretty bow around it. Thank you.